I want to tell you about something I found while digging through the Cook County archives last month. There's a photograph from Saturday, July 24th, 1915. It shows the Chicago River. There's a ship, the SS Eastland, and it's lying on its side in the water. The water is only about 20 feet deep, but inside that ship, 844 people drowned. What struck me when I first looked at that photograph was not the ship itself. It was the people standing on the dock. They're watching. Some of them are the family members of people who didn't come back up. I started pulling the court records, the inspection documents, the newspaper articles from before the disaster. And I found something that doesn't make sense until you read it carefully. This ship had nearly tipped over before, multiple times. In 1904, in 1907, in 1912. The company knew. The federal inspectors knew. They wrote it down. And then, 3 months before the Eastland capsized, Congress passed a new law meant to make ships safer. A law designed to prevent another Titanic. That law is what actually sealed those 844 people inside the hull. This is the story of how good intentions and institutional negligence can kill more people than the disaster itself.
On Saturday, July 24th, 1915, the Western Electric Company organized an annual picnic. They chartered a ship, the SS Eastland, to take employees and their families from Chicago to Michigan City for the day. It was a summer outing. Families bought new clothes, children looked forward to it. The ship arrived at the dock early in the morning. People began boarding around 7:30 a.m. The weather was clear. The water was calm.
I've been reading the passenger lists. There are names. Margaret Sullivan, age 8. Her mother, Anne Sullivan. Thomas Carney, age 6. The Nowak family, all 5 of them boarded together. The Eastland was not new. It had been operating since 1903. It was known as a fast ship, a speed dog, the company called it. It was built to beat competitors on the Chicago to Michigan route. But it had a problem from the beginning. The ship had been designed with a shallow hull and no permanent keel. That meant it was unstable in the water. It had to rely on internal tanks, ballast tanks filled with river water to stay upright. The ship was what naval engineers call a crank ship. That's the technical term. A crank ship tips easily. The company knew this. I found it documented. In 1904, the ship had nearly capsized with 3,000 people on board. The newspaper coverage called it a close call, a near disaster. But the ship kept operating. In 1907, it was listed dangerously again. In 1912, again. Each time the newspapers reported it. Each time the company made minor adjustments and kept selling tickets.
On Saturday, July 24th, 1915, The Western Electric Company organized an annual picnic. They chartered a ship, the SS Eastland, to take employees and their families from Chicago to Michigan City for the day. It was a summer outing. Families bought new clothes, children looked forward to it. The ship arrived at the dock early in the morning. People began boarding around 7:30 a.m. The weather was clear. The water was calm.
I've been reading the passenger lists. There are names. Margaret Sullivan, age 8. Her mother, Anne Sullivan. Thomas Carney, age 6. The Nowak family, all 5 of them boarded together. The Eastland was not new. It had been operating since 1903. It was known as a fast ship, a speed dog, the company called it. It was built to beat competitors on the Chicago to Michigan route. But it had a problem from the beginning. The ship had been designed with a shallow hull and no permanent keel. That meant it was unstable in the water. It had to rely on internal tanks, ballast tanks filled with river water, to stay upright. The ship was what naval engineers call a crank ship. That's the technical term. A crank ship tips easily. The company knew this. I found it documented. In 1904, the ship had nearly capsized with 3,000 people on board. The newspaper coverage called it a close call, a near disaster. But the ship kept operating. In 1907, it was listed dangerously again. In 1912, again. Each time the newspapers reported it. Each time the company made minor adjustments and kept selling tickets.
In April 1915, 4 years after the Titanic sank, the U.S. Congress passed a new maritime law. It was called the Follette Seamen's Act. The law was written in response to the Titanic disaster. It was straightforward. Every ship carrying passengers had to have enough lifeboats on board for every single person. The intent was clear. The requirement was non-negotiable. Every ship had to comply.
When I read this in the congressional records, I had to stop for a minute, because I knew how this ended. The Eastland's owners faced a choice. They could redesign the hull to make the ship more stable. That would be expensive. It would take time. Or they could comply with the law by adding lifeboats to the ship they already had. They added the lifeboats. The company bolted heavy lifeboat racks and lifeboats to the ship's top decks. The lifeboats were meant to be there. The law required them. But on a ship that was already unstable, adding weight to the top decks had an unintended consequence. It raised the ship's centre of gravity. It made the top-heavy ship even more top-heavy. The safety law, intended to save lives in open water, made the Eastland a tipping hazard while docked. The safety equipment sealed the ship's fate. I want to be clear about what this means. The company wasn't breaking the law. It was following the law. The federal inspectors approved it. But the combination of a poorly designed ship and the addition of heavy lifeboats created an unstable vessel that would capsize under normal operating conditions. And on that Saturday morning in July, normal operating conditions arrived. Let me walk you through what the crew members testified happened that morning. This testimony is preserved in the Cook County Coroner's inquest from 1915. I have the original transcripts. As passengers continued boarding, the ship began to list, to lean to one side. The engineer on duty was Joseph Eriksson. He was monitoring the ballast tanks in the engine room. He felt the ship tilting. He made a note of it. Here is where the story turns on a single decision. Eriksson had a choice. He could have reported the severe listing to the captain and recommended stopping the boarding. He could have ordered people to get off the ship. He could have asked for help. Instead, he tried to fix it himself. In his testimony, Eriksson said he attempted to stabilize the ship by pumping water between the ballast tanks. The logic made sense. Shift the weight, level the ship. But there was a problem with the Eastland's design. The ballast tanks were not properly partitioned. When Eriksson pumped water from one tank to another, the water didn't stay where it should have. It sloshed back and forth, creating what naval engineers call a free surface effect. The water movement across the tank floor actually accelerated the listing, made the ship tip faster, not slower. I found the naval engineering analysis conducted after the disaster. It explained this precisely. Eriksson's attempt to stabilize the ship made the situation worse. But he didn't know that. He was working with the information he had in the engine room, isolated from what was happening above. At 8:32 in the morning, the ship rolled completely onto its side. It was still moored to the dock. It did not drift. It did not sink gradually. It inverted. People who had been standing upright were suddenly underwater. People in the lower decks were trapped. The portholes, small circular windows, were suddenly submerged. Water rushed in. 844 people drowned in that ship.
Rescue began immediately. Workers from the dock rushed into the water. Firefighters arrived with cutting torches. They cut holes in the hull. They pulled bodies out. The process took hours. Bodies were lined up on the dock and identified. Families waited to see if their names would be among the recovered. 844 people were dead. It was the deadliest maritime disaster involving American citizens up to that point. More Americans died on the Eastland than died on the Titanic.
What I needed to understand was, why did this happen? And more importantly, why didn't anyone stop it? I went back to the records. The Federal Bureau of Steamboat Inspection Service had authorised the Eastland to carry 2,500 passengers. But the ship was originally designed to carry about 500 people safely. That's a 5-fold increase over the original capacity. No structural changes, no stability testing, just a rubber stamp on the paperwork. I found inspection records going back to 1903. The federal inspectors had noted, they had documented in their reports that the ship was unstable. They had seen the near disasters in 1904, 1907 and 1912. They knew. But they kept authorising higher and higher passenger capacities. And I think I understand why. If the federal inspectors admitted the Eastland was unsafe, they would have to admit they had been wrong. They would have to admit they had approved a dangerous ship. Their entire authority would be questioned. So they didn't admit it. They rubber-stamped the increases. The company didn't need to make any real safety improvements. They just needed the federal paperwork to say it was okay. Until it wasn't okay anymore. After the disaster, there were investigations. There were hearings. The coroner's inquest examined witnesses. I read through all of it. Here is what happened. No criminal charges were filed against the ship's owners. No one went to jail for 844 deaths. The only person who faced any blame was Joseph Eriksson, the engineer, and he died before any legal proceedings concluded. The company that owned the ship, the St. Joseph Chicago Steamship Company, used a maritime law called limited liability. This law stated that the company's financial liability should be limited to the value of the ship. Since the ship was now a wreck at the bottom of the river, its value was nearly zero. The company paid almost nothing to the families of the loved ones who lost their lives. But there's another part of this that I need to explain, because it shaped how people understood what happened. The company argued that the passengers were responsible for the disaster. They said that when people on the ship saw a passing boat or wanted to wave at people on the dock, they all rushed to one side of the ship. That sudden weight shift, they claimed, was what caused the capsizing. It's a clean story. Victims caused their own deaths. The company is not responsible. But I found the engineering analysis conducted after the disaster. Naval architects studied the ship's design and the ballast tank system. Their conclusion? The Eastland was so unstable that it would have capsized even if the passengers had remained perfectly still. The ship was doomed from the moment it took on 2,500 people. It was a design failure, not a passenger behaviour failure. But the narrative, the one that blamed the passengers, it stuck. It served the company's interests. And in the legal system of 1915, it worked. After the ship was raised, it was sold. The US Navy purchased it and renamed it the USS Wilmette. For 30 years, the same ship that had killed 844 people operated as a training vessel on the lake. The people who lost family members had to watch that ship sail. They had to see it given a new name, a new purpose, a new life. What I keep thinking about when I read through these records is the photograph I found at the beginning. One of the Chicago River with the ship on its side and people standing on the dock watching. Those people were waiting to find out whether someone they loved would come back up out of the water. Most of them didn't. And if you do leave a comment, please be thoughtful with each other. Some of the people watching these videos may have personal or family connections to stories like this. I always appreciate hearing your thoughts and perspectives. Just try to keep the discussion respectful. Thank you for listening.